War films have always carried a strange double life. Part entertainment, part history lesson, part emotional gut punch. And here's the surprise. Many of the classics that once packed theaters are now completely free to watch, legally, in 2025. How often do you stumble across a timeless film and not have to pay a dime? What stories of grit, sacrifice, and survival are hiding in plain sight? Stay tuned, because the list ahead is full of cinematic treasures you didn't expect. Undercover, 1943. Ever wonder what wartime training looked like when Hollywood was roped into the mission? Undercover is not your typical war flick. It's a dramatized training film created by the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, the forerunner to today's intelligence agencies. At first glance, it plays like a spy thriller. A secret agent slips through occupied Europe, making contacts, dodging traps, and carrying out missions. But here's the twist. It wasn't designed just to entertain. It was meant to teach recruits how to behave in the field. That alone makes it a fascinating time capsule. You get the shadows of film noir, dimly lit streets, coded conversations, tense escapes, all while realizing that young trainees were once watching this as a literal guide to survival. It blurred the line between movie and manual, fusing cinematic drama with practical lessons. You can almost picture a room of fresh-faced operatives scribbling notes while gripping their seats. The production values were surprisingly high, which is why it still holds up visually today. Hollywood talent was quietly tapped to give the film polish, ensuring its lessons stuck. The storytelling made ordinary instructions, like blending in, watching for betrayals, or passing messages, feel like high-stakes drama. It's a rare example of cinema engineered for both suspense and instruction. What makes Undercover worth your time now is how it captures the energy of an era when movies weren't just stories. They were tools of strategy. For modern viewers, it's thrilling and eerie to realize that what looks like a gripping spy movie once carried deadly serious stakes. And now, it's free to stream, letting you peek straight into the wartime classroom. The Black Watch, 1929. Step back to the dawn of the sound era, when movies were still experimenting with talking technology. John Ford's The Black Watch is one of those rare gems that feels like a window into two different battles, the war on screen and the film industry learning how to find its voice. Released in 1929, it followed the story of a Scottish regiment pulled from India to serve in the trenches of World War I. What makes this film stand out isn't just its age, but the atmosphere it captured. Early talkies had a stiffness. Actors sometimes spoke as if they were still on a stage, but Ford managed to inject a rough, sweeping energy into his soldiers. The camera lingered on mud-choked fields, tense mess halls, and faces trying to mask fear with duty. In many ways, it planted the seeds of Ford's later masterpieces, blending personal struggle with the enormity of global conflict. Audiences at the time were stunned by the scale. The battle sequences might look tame compared to modern spectacles, but imagine seeing that in 1929, when people were just getting used to hearing voices synced to moving pictures. It gave the sense of immediacy, like history was speaking directly. The accents, the commands, the cries, they added texture that silent films could never capture. On top of its historical value, The Black Watch has recently slipped into the public domain, which means you can watch it today without worrying about paywalls. That's not just a lucky break. It's a chance to see how early Hollywood wrestled with the challenges of portraying war honestly, while also learning how to make sound feel natural. Watching it in 2025 feels like stepping into a time machine. You get the rawness of early sound, the craft of a craft director who would later define American cinema, and the haunting impression of a world still reeling from its first global conflict. Free, legal, and unforgettable. That's The Black Watch. The Stranger 1946. Picture this. Orson Welles, the man who shook Hollywood with Citizen Kane, directing and starring in a post-war thriller about hunting down a fugitive from the darkest chapter of history. The Stranger isn't a battlefield story, but it is very much a war film, just one that plays out in small-town America rather than the trenches of Europe. The plot grips you from the first scene. Edward G. Robinson plays a dogged investigator chasing a man who's changed his identity and blended into quiet New England life. That man, Orson Welles himself, hiding behind the mask of respectability as a schoolteacher. The tension builds as Robinson closes in, and the viewer gets pulled into a game of cat and mouse that feels both intimate and global in scale. After all, the war had ended only months before this film was released, and audiences were still haunted by the question, how many dangerous figures might have slipped away into normal life? What's remarkable is how Wells filmed it. The use of shadows, clock towers, and tight framing creates a suffocating sense of paranoia. You feel the walls closing in with every tick of the clock, every suspicious glance across town. It's part noir, part war drama, and wholly unforgettable. Here's the kicker. Because the film's copyright wasn't renewed, The Stranger is in the public domain. That means you can legally stream it free in 2025, in crisp, restored versions that highlight just how sharp Wells's vision was. And it's not just an artifact. It's gripping storytelling that holds up against modern thrillers. The Stranger proves that war doesn't end when the treaties are signed. Sometimes it follows you home, slipping into the shadows of ordinary streets. Watching it now is like opening a time capsule of America's post-war anxiety, wrapped up in one of the tightest thrillers of the 1,940 seconds. Bombs Over Burma, 1,943. If you think Hollywood only told war stories from a Western perspective, Bombs Over Burma will surprise you. This 1,943 film puts the spotlight on Chinese resistance fighters in Burma at a time when Allied forces were desperately trying to disrupt enemy supply lines in Southeast Asia. It was one of the earliest American films to center a Chinese heroine, played by Anna May Wong, who was already breaking barriers as the first Asian American movie star in Hollywood. The story follows Wong as a schoolteacher who becomes an unlikely hero, using her wits and bravery to aid Allied forces against enemy advances. What makes the film stand out is how it blends espionage, suspense, and frontline danger. You're not watching tanks rolling across Europe, you're in a jungle, listening for the hum of planes, feeling the danger creeping through the dense forests. Anna May Wong carries the film with understated power. She wasn't given nearly enough leading roles in her career, but here, she gets to shine. She plays a character both vulnerable and fierce, one who represents the countless civilians pulled into the chaos of war. The production was modest compared to Hollywood's big war epics, but its impact was cultural as much as cinematic. It showed audiences that the global struggle wasn't confined to the familiar Western Front. By highlighting a Chinese perspective, it broadened the scope of wartime storytelling. Today, Bombs Over Burma is free to watch because it has entered the public domain. That's a gift for modern audiences, because it allows you to experience both a forgotten chapter of World War II cinema and a rare leading performance from one of Hollywood's most important trailblazers. It's not just a war film, it's a reminder that history is global, and bravery isn't confined to one language, one front, or one uniform. Corregidor, 1,943. Some war films are glossy morale boosters. Corregidor is not one of them. Released in 1943, it dives into the desperate defense of the island fortress of Corregidor in the Philippines, one of the most harrowing battles of the early Pacific War. The movie doesn't sugarcoat the struggle. Instead, it drops you into crumbling tunnels, dwindling supplies, and the grinding tension of soldiers and civilians trapped in an impossible situation. What makes it hit hard is the balance of personal drama and sweeping battle imagery. You follow a group of doctors, nurses, and fighters as they cling to hope inside the island's defenses, even as bombardments rain down above. The film captures that claustrophobic feeling of being under siege. There's no way out, no reinforcements coming, only endurance against impossible odds. For audiences in 1943, this wasn't ancient history. Corregidor had fallen just the year before, and the memory of its defenders' bravery and sacrifice was raw. Watching it now, you can sense the urgency. The filmmakers weren't just telling a story, they were honoring a fight that was still shaping headlines. The performances elevate it beyond propaganda. The characters aren't cardboard heroes, they're weary, frightened, sometimes cynical, but still determined. The medical staff in particular highlight another side of war, the constant race to save lives under conditions where even basic supplies run out. Today, Corregidor sits in the public domain, which means you can stream it freely and see for yourself how Hollywood tried to grapple with a very real, very recent tragedy. It's not flashy, but it's haunting in its authenticity. Watching it now, you don't just get a war film. You get a front-row seat to how America processed one of its toughest early defeats. If you want a film that makes you feel the weight of survival when the walls are closing in, Corregidor delivers in spades. The Black Brigade, 1,970. Sometimes, the best war films, where the dude of an example, aren't about the big battles you read in history books, they're about the overlooked stories that finally get the spotlight. The Black Brigade, a 1,970 made-for-TV movie, is one of those hidden gems. It tells the story of an African-American officer assigned a group of inexperienced black soldiers and tasked with one nearly impossible mission: take a bridge in Germany before the enemy can blow it. The setup feels like a classic underdog story, and that's exactly what it delivers. At first, the soldiers are dismissed as unprepared and unwanted. The officer himself faces prejudice even from his fellow Americans. But as the film unfolds, what starts as a grim assignment transforms into a gripping tale of unity, grit, and respect earned under fire. One of the fascinating things about the Black Brigade is that it came out at a time when America was still wrestling with civil rights. By framing a war story through this lens, the movie packed a 1-2 punch. It delivered the action audiences expected, while also forcing viewers to confront the injustice of sidelining men who were willing to serve. The performances are heartfelt, even if the production doesn't have the blockbuster shine of bigger films. What matters is the humanity. You see men who've been underestimated find their footing, bond as a team, and ultimately prove their worth in the most dangerous way possible. Today, The Black Brigade is free to watch thanks to its public domain status. And in 2025, it feels more relevant than ever. It's a war movie, yes, but also a statement about equality, courage, and the power of breaking down barriers. If you like stories where the underdogs rise to the occasion, this is one you won't want to miss. Battle of Blood Island, 1960. What happens when all that's left of a battle is just 2 survivors? That's the premise of Battle of Blood Island, a scrappy, low-budget war drama that packs more punch than its tiny production size would suggest. Released in 1960, it follows 2 American soldiers who live through a devastating defeat and find themselves stranded on a remote island, still crawling with danger. This isn't the glamorous side of war. There are no sweeping orchestral scores or triumphant flag-raising scenes. Instead, you get exhaustion, suspicion, and the psychological toll of being cut off from the world. The movie forces you to sit with 2 men who can't even fully trust each other, yet have to cooperate if they want to survive. Shot in black and white, the film leans into its limitations by creating an atmosphere that feels raw and stripped down. You can practically feel the humidity pressing down, hear the uneasy silences, and sense the paranoia creeping in. What's brilliant is how the small scale works to its advantage. With no massive battle scenes, the tension turns inward, showing how war can break people down even when the shooting stops. When it first came out, Battle of Blood Island wasn't a box office giant, but it slowly built a cult reputation among fans of war cinema. It's a reminder that not every story is about thousands of troops clashing. Sometimes it's just 2 souls trying to stay alive while wrestling with their own demons. Now that it's free to stream, modern viewers can rediscover this forgotten gem. It's intimate, unsettling, and unforgettable. If you want a war film that strips away spectacle and focuses on survival at its rawest, Battle of Blood Island will hook you. Away All Boats, 1956. When people talk about naval war films, the conversation usually drifts toward the big names, but Away All Boats deserves a spot in that lineup. Released in 1956, it's based on the best-selling novel by Kenneth Dodson, who himself served in the U.S. Navy during World War II. That personal experience bleeds into every frame, giving the story a sense of authenticity that still resonates. The film follows the crew of an amphibious attack transport ship as they ferry troops across the Pacific and face down relentless challenges, enemy strikes, rough seas, and the grinding fatigue of constant missions. At its heart, it's less about one big, climactic battle and more about the daily grind of keeping a ship and its men alive. Jeff Chandler leads the cast as the commanding officer, a man torn between duty and the strain of command. What's fascinating here is that the story doesn't shy away from the flaws of leadership. You see tension between officers and crew, moments of rebellion, and the strain of pushing people to their limits. It paints a fuller, more nuanced picture of service life than many polished war dramas of its time. The film's production is impressive for the era, with large-scale naval sequences that feel grand and convincing. It captures the sheer size of operations needed to move men and supplies across the Pacific theater. And yet, it balances that spectacle with small human moments, letters from home, friendships tested, and the quiet resilience of men far from shore. Today, you can watch Away All Boats free on streaming platforms like Tubi, making it a perfect pick for anyone who loves naval stories. It's the kind of film that reminds you war isn't just about battles. It's about endurance, leadership, and the bonds forged under unrelenting pressure. The Adventures of Tartu, 1943. If you love espionage stories with a war backdrop, The Adventures of Tartu delivers thrills in spades. Released in 1943, this British production blends spy intrigue with wartime tension, creating a story that's as stylish as it is suspenseful. The plot follows Robert Donat as Captain Tartu, a British officer who slips behind enemy lines in Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia. Disguised as a collaborator, he infiltrates a chemical plant where secret plans are brewing, and the clock is always ticking. What makes this film shine is Donat's performance. He brings charm, wit, and just enough vulnerability to make the stakes feel real. Every scene drips with tension. One slip of the tongue, one wrong look, and his cover could be blown. The spy genre was already popular, but here it's injected with the urgency of a world at war. There's no room for gadgets or flashy tricks, just raw nerves, fast thinking, and the knowledge that discovery would mean the end. Stylistically, the movie is a treat. Shadowy cinematography gives it a noir-like feel, with smoke-filled rooms and long corridors that seem to stretch into paranoia. And because it was made in the thick of the war, there's an undeniable immediacy. This wasn't distant history for the audience. It was a mirror of reality. Today, The Adventures of Tartu is free to stream, and it's more than just a curiosity. It's a reminder that wartime storytelling wasn't only about frontline battles, the spy games, the hidden missions, the people who risked everything behind the curtain. They were just as vital. For modern viewers, it's a gripping slice of cinematic history, wrapped in suspense that still works 80 years later. The Big Lift, 1950. Sometimes war stories don't end with peace treaties. They continue in the uneasy years that follow. The Big Lift, released in 1950, is one of the best films to capture that post-war tension. Instead of focusing on battles, it zeroes in on the Berlin Airlift, the massive operation where American and British forces flew supplies into West Berlin after Soviet forces cut off access to the city. The film stars Montgomery Clift and Paul Douglas as U.S. Air Force personnel stationed in Germany, navigating not just the grueling logistics of the airlift but also the complex emotions of a city still scarred by war. Unlike many Hollywood productions of the time, The Big Lift was shot entirely on location in Berlin. That choice gives it an authenticity. You can feel bombed-out buildings, rubble-filled streets, and the haunting emptiness of a city divided. What sets the movie apart is its balance of personal drama and global stakes. Clift's character wrestles with a budding romance with a German woman, raising questions of trust and reconciliation in a city still reeling from recent conflict. Meanwhile, the airlift missions themselves are depicted with gripping realism, showing the relentless pace of flights that kept Berliners alive through one of the most pivotal standoffs of the early Cold War. For audiences in 1950, the story was more than entertainment. It was recent history still shaping headlines. Watching it today, you not only get a powerful human drama, but also a crash course in one of the first major confrontations of the Cold War. Best of all, The Big Lift is now free to stream in 2025, thanks to its public domain status. It's a film that mixes sweeping aerial footage with intimate, human storytelling. And it reminds us that sometimes the most heroic battles aren't fought with guns. They're fought with endurance, compassion, and sheer determination to keep hope alive. Go for Broke, 1951. If you want a war movie that combines thrilling combat with an underdog story, Go for Broke is the one to watch. Released in 1951, it tells the true story of the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, an all-Japanese-American unit that became one of the most decorated in U.S. history. The film centers on Van Johnson as a lieutenant assigned to lead this unit. At first, he views his soldiers with skepticism, reflecting the prejudice many Japanese Americans faced during the war. But as the story unfolds, the unit proves not only their skill but their extraordinary courage, turning the lieutenant's doubt into respect. What makes Go for Broke so powerful is that many of the supporting cast were real veterans of the 442nd. They weren't professional actors, but their presence brings an authenticity you can't fake. When you see them in uniform, you know these men actually lived what the film portrays. The battle sequences are well staged, capturing both the chaos of combat and the quiet determination of soldiers who had everything to prove. But the heart of the movie lies in the personal arcs, men fighting for a country that had questioned their loyalty, showing through sheer bravery that they belonged. When it was released, the film was both an action, drama, and a statement against prejudice. It reminded audiences of the injustice Japanese Americans endured during the war, even as their sons fought valiantly overseas. Today, it stands as both an inspiring war film and a cultural milestone. Best of all, it's free to watch now in 2025. Go for Broke doesn't just entertain, it honors a unit whose motto still resonates. Go for broke, meaning give it everything you've got. That's exactly what these soldiers did, and the movie makes sure you'll never forget it. He Proud and the Damned, 1972. War films don't always stick to the well-worn battlefields of Europe or the Pacific. The Proud and the Damned, released in 1972, takes the story south, following a group of American Civil War veterans who head to South America in search of a new life, only to find themselves caught in the middle of another conflict. The film stars Chuck Connors as the leader of this ragtag band of former soldiers. Hardened by the Civil War and hungry for redemption or fortune, they drift into Colombia, where revolution brews and loyalties are tested. At first, it seems like a fresh start, new land, new opportunities, but old patterns of war quickly reappear, pulling them into battles that echo the chaos they thought they'd left behind. What makes The Proud and the Damned so compelling is how it explores the idea that war doesn't end just because one fight is over. For these veterans, the struggle continues, whether through violence or the weight of choices they can't escape. The backdrop of South America gives the movie a unique flavor: dusty villages, mountainous terrain, and a revolution simmering on the horizon. It's a change of scenery from the trenches and jungles of most war films, but the themes of loyalty, brotherhood, and sacrifice remain just as sharp. The movie was made on a modest budget, but that actually works in its favor. There's a raw, stripped-down feel to the action, and Connors brings his trademark intensity to a character who is part warrior, part wanderer, and part reluctant hero. Now in the public domain, The Proud and the Damned is free to watch in 2025. For modern audiences, it's both a gripping adventure and a reminder that the scars of war can't be outrun, they follow you, no matter where you go. It's not just a forgotten film. It's a fresh perspective on how war stories stretch beyond the expected battlefields. So there you have it, 12 classic war films that you can watch right now, completely free and totally legal in 2025. From hidden training reels to sprawling naval dramas, from underdog heroes to sobering warnings about the future, these movies prove that war cinema is about more than explosions. It's about humanity, resilience, and memory. Which of these free classics will you watch first? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit subscribe for more hidden gems, and share this list with a friend who loves film history.